Hey y'all.
Hey guys.
Resistance chicks.
We're back and we're talking federal land grabs today.
This is a really scary map once Leah explains to you what it is. Kind of
you probably haven't seen it because it's a little bit new to me too. But if you look at this map and you'll see that there's a lot of red to the left of it and a lot of white to the right. And what the left shows is the land owned by the federal government.
Now that may not seem scary to you until we explain to you how the federal government has no constitutional right to actually own land outside of certain
constraints that allow for the government to own certain parcels, but certainly not, I think,
half the country. I mean, okay, not half, but like a third.
It's actually 30% of all U.S. territory.
That's really scary to me because as a nation, we're supposed to be states.
Right.
Right? Individual states that and a republic that get represented by our representatives in Washington, D.C. However, when the federal government owns land, then these states, like, they don't even have their own anything. Land is what makes a state. They think,
right.
No, it's just the people that make it.
Right.
Carry on.
Right.
Scary.
So basically, in these federally owned large swaths, millions of acres, swaths of land, it's nothing. It does nothing. It sits there. It does nothing. Now, a lot of us can say, oh, well, I think that, it should be owned by everyone. Well, should your neighborhood be owned by everyone? Look at Pennsylvania or New York or Texas, for example. How would they feel if suddenly all of it was federally owned and there was no people? And so one of the questions people would ask is, why does the federal government own all of this land? And there's another breakup picture I wanted to show you kind of here. You can see it broken apart. So these states right here, west, in they're called the Rocky Mountain States pretty much in west, constitute 53% of them. Kind of an average are owned by the federal government,
right.
Whereas here it's 4%.
4. That's 4.
So
versus 50. It's kind of a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. And so
how did they get it to start with?
Well, and this is a kind of a unbiased article. CBS Local from Minnesota is, why does the federal government own so much land in the West? The federal lands in the western states are managed by a number of different agencies. You've got the Department of Defense, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the national parks. Of course, we all think national parks.
Right.
This is not national park land.
These states are not, encompassed by national parks alone. And those, I mean, it's like an entire state.
We all think, oh no, we're going to lose Yellowstone. No. Okay, so basically it's the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. And a lot of you have heard of Clive Bundy and Lavoy Fickum.
Finnicito.
He was the man murdered by the FBI. And the Bundys, whether you agree with what they were doing or not, there's a really good article from somebody who didn't necessarily, a rancher who didn't necessarily agree with how they were doing it, but why.
Right.
He understood why. Professor of geography at the University of Minnesota, partly it's a historical accident, though I keep saying federal ownership isn't a historical accident. Congress can decide to sell the land whenever they want.
And they actually should, because you were reading an article earlier today that described how after the Louisiana Purchase, we acquired all of this. Can you bring that back up again? We acquired everything that was
west of the Mississippi, kind of.
Right. So we acquired that land, and they were supposed to distribute it and give it to...
Well, basically, you've heard of the government selling land to homesteaders or giving land away.
Yeah, like we all saw that fantastic Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman movie.
So Oklahoma was far and away.
Far and away. Far and away. They were Irish.
So you got Oklahoma here. That was, a lot of it was given away from homesteads. Now, there's mountainous regions. A lot of it's inhospitable. A lot of it's only really good for things like hunting or grazing. So you need large swaths of land. in order to
Graze
raise your animals there. And we'll get to why that's important that we do that in the United States versus in some other countries, bringing in food from other countries. But back to why none of the land within the original 13 colonies was ever owned by the federal government, because remember, we were British colonies.
Yeah.
The federal government wasn't created. So this
Until
was land after the United States was created. All national forests and parks in those areas of the country were purchased by the United States government in the 20th century, the 1900s.
Right.
So out west, the federal government sold and gave away land in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was an inducement to get people to move
out there
from the East Coast.
Why
to the
else
interior.
would you get onto one of those wagon trains and risk everything that you have and your life,
Right.
and go and live out in the middle of nowhere?
Right.
There's got to be an incentive there, because we really wanted people to spread.
Right. So they said it was beautiful scenery, but it was hard to live on.
Sure.
In the 1800s, though, the federal government reversed course, saying it was concerned about the timber industry. And policymakers were afraid of running out of forest land, so they decided to hold on to the land that they had, all 53% of it, and figured the federal government could manage the land better than private interest. And I understand, look at what we've done to the eastern half of America. We've kind of bulldozed everything.
Oh yeah, deforestation is really, it is a problem.
We are environmentalists, huge environmentalists, but I don't believe that it's the federal government's job.
Right.
To
each state should control what happens within its state, because people are smart.
Right.
And when you take away that innate responsibility in we the people and our states to govern our state and our localities,
exactly,
then the nation falls apart.
So you've got right now 62% of Idaho is federal land.
Poor Idaho. Poor taters.
65% of Utah.
Poor Mormons.
And the way that they calculated this, give or take a few percentages, and 85% of Nevada. You might know what? Might as well not even have. You have a 15% state, Nevada. 15% of the state you could live in.
Who owns
85% you can't live in. What if that was Ohio? You know what I mean?
So what are they doing? What's happening on this land right now?
The federal government makes billions of dollars off of royalties. Right now it's about 12%, 12.5% they make on royalties for mining and for oil. But the kicker is this is what gags my goat.
It gagged your goat?
Gets my goat. Gags my goat.
It gags the goat.
You can
That's
rent
more than getting your
if you're an oil company, you can rent that land for prospecting for $2 an acre.
What?
Now, 40%, I was reading today, 40% of the land that you put a bid in, right, for these acres.
Yeah.
40% go for the $2. The minimum bid is $2 an acre.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, it goes for $2 an acre.
Right. So what you're telling me is that on this land,
Yeah.
it's really just being used for money.
Pretty much.
So it's not the park system? Because,
No.
you could look at all the nice red and think,
Right.
you know what? We're just conserving areas.
Right.
This is for conservation purposes only.
Right.
Which, did you bring up that article that you had read where it explained what rights the government had?
Yeah, I do have that. I do have that, and I wanted to read that to you guys. I was trying to go in order on
sorry.
No, you're fine. It's kind of the next one. I wanted to read to you guys an article by a rancher who he understands why Clive Bundy did what he did. He doesn't necessarily agree with it.
We should all actually be able to debate issues.
Exactly.
Meaning to view both sides and come at it from an unbiased standpoint and view both sides and then use the word of God to come to the truth.
If you haven't visited the 10th Amendment Center.com,
fabulous resource.
I want you to, if you want to really get to the grit of the Constitution, visit this this website. They're doing some great work, and I highly support them.
10thamendmentcenter.com.
Right. So this is an article written by, I guess I'll just go down here, Rob Nadelson. He is a longtime conservative, free market activist, but professionally he is a constitutional scholar whose meticulous studies of the Constitution's original meaning have been repeatedly cited in the U.S. Supreme Court opinions and published or cited by many top journalists. Okay, so...
And it's very important that we stick to the Constitution. That's our basis.
So he is basically a guy who eats and sleeps and drinks the Constitution and how it should be applied.
Right.
And there are some people that say the federal government should never own any land but like a Navy thing, Navy or some military bases. And some people say the federal government should just own everything. There's two different views on it, and this guy breaks it down to what constitutionally we have the rights to. So under the property clause, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, land title to the federal government and held outside state boundaries is territory. Here, the Northwest Territory. And federal land held within state boundaries is other property. Okay?
So can you think of what it would be the first territory that comes to mind outside of a state that the federal government owns? Raise your hand. Let's go with DC. Territory.
No, actually. I'm going to get to that. It's not a territory.
Oh.
No, it's not.
We can cut that out of the video.
Okay. All right. Okay, so if the host state agrees, the federal government can acquire an enclave within the state under the enclave clause. Now here's where Washington, D.C. comes in. This grants governmental jurisdiction to the federal government, but the federal government has to acquire title separately. Washington, D.C., the most important enclave, for example, is under federal jurisdiction, but much of the land is held by other parties, including individuals. So Washington, D.C. is an enclave.
Okay, right.
All right. So the property clause gives Congress unconditional power to dispose of property and authority to regulate what is already held. It does not mention a power to acquire land. So under the treaty clause, the federal government may acquire land outside of state boundaries as long as the area is governed as a territory. The federal government may retain any land it deems best. So this was written when we had territories. Kansas was a territory. These are you were a territory
until you were a state.
Exactly. So, as for acreage, other property within state boundaries, under the necessary and proper clause, the federal government may acquire and retain land necessary for carrying out its enumerated powers. This includes parcels for military bases, post office, buildings to house federal employees, undertaking enumerated functions, and the like. It is not necessary to form federal enclaves for these purposes. You
don't need a bunch of little Washington D.C.s all over this country.
But within state boundaries, the Constitution grants no authority to retain acreage for enumerated purposes, such as land for grazing, mineral development, agriculture, forest, and parks.
Forest and parks. So when everybody goes and says the federal government should own land because we need the parks.
Right.
No, that's what state parks are for.
And do we even need state parks? That's a whole other thing. Within the state, you can control more, right?
Right.
Once a state is created and it's no longer a territory. The federal government has the duty to dispose of tracts not used for the other enumerated purposes.
The federal government has the duty to dispose of the tracts that are not used for the other enumerated post office, military base, housing for federal employees.
So all
purposes.
of that red, unless it's like
they got the duty to dispose. I'm gonna make a sign that says "duty to dispose." Duty to dispose. That's got a nice ring to it.
In the purpose of disposal, the federal government must follow the rules of public trust. It would be a breach of fiduciary duty for the feds to simply grant all of its surplus property to state governments.
Hang on though. Let's go back to that word fiduciary. If any of you have ever had a loved one die, you understand what a fiduciary does. Does the fiduciary ever at any time actually own the things with which they are entrusted for a temporary time being? No, it doesn't.
It's kind of like if Oh, well, we personally have a fiduciary who still has a piece of property from our grandma down in Florida,
Right.
and she passed away in 2008.
Right.
So he's basically kind of acting like the federal government, kind of like
Holding
this,
it, yeah.
this land. But there's nothing we can do about it.
Right.
He's like the federal stinking government. Anyways.
Sorry, reread that sentence. I just, for those of you that have never had a loved one die, you might not know. Executor is another,
Executor of the will.
you know, fiduciary
So
is a big word.
the executor can't just go rolling around and all the vehicles living in the house. I mean, just because it can't just own everything, it has to, in a timely manner,
Yeah,
dispose of the property.
right.
So, in the process of disposal, the federal government must follow the rules of public trust. It would be a breach of fiduciary duty for the feds to simply grant all of its surplus property to state governments. Each tract must be disposed of in accordance with the best interest of the American people.
The American people.
For example, natural wonders and environmentally sensitive areas, such as those now encompassed by the national parks, might be conveyed under strict conditions to the state park authorities, as it is in Britain, to perpetual environmental trusts. Land useful only for grazing or mining or agriculture should be sold or homesteaded.
Wow.
With or without restrictions. The restrictions might include environmental protections, public easements, the protection for hunters and anglers. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do here, but having 53% of federal land, or 53% of land,
American land,
in the West owned by the federal government, just sitting there doing nothing, is a breach of fiduciary trust. Most states were admitted to the Union pursuant to treaties, agreements of secession, or laws passed by Congress. These are called organic laws. They include but are not limited to enabling acts and acts of admission. These laws cannot change the Constitution, but they have some interesting ramifications for federal land ownership. That is a topic for another post, he says. So these are a lot of, kind of gives you just a basis. He's got a whole article.
this is bare bones.
This is the bare bones on what this means. Now, why I'm bringing this up is recently the federal government, Obama's midnight crash on
Another one of his lame ducks.
Bears Ears National. He's turning it into a national monument. It's a public land
In what state?
in Utah. And Representative Jason Chavez and a lot of them are saying that they've actually been trying to work with President Obama for a while.
On this particular issue.
And they had come up with some, a good compromise with the Indians who claimed that they had some, and the Indians wanted stewardship. The Native Americans, I'm sorry, wanted co-stewardship of the land, and they're not going to get that with President Obama's. Representative Chavez said that he had a letter written to the president. He tried to meet with the president. The
There were
president
several letters written that he never
didn't work with
even
anybody in
respond.
Utah. The governor is against it. The local people are against it.
But it doesn't matter what a state wants or what its state's representatives think are best for a state. It only matters what an exiting president wants to do on his midnight, pen. Phone in his pen.
A lot of states, for a while, have been trying to get their federal lands back. Utah is the most famous of this. In 2012, they passed a law getting back millions of their acres. Now they've had to, they're gonna have to fight the federal government over it. It was more of a symbolic thing. They knew it was symbolic because the federal government wasn't going to just grant.
What was another great thing that was symbolic that we did?
The Emancipation Proclamation.
Thank you.
Very good. Ding, ding, ding. So this was actually from 2010, but just to give you an idea of what Utah passed here.
Co-founder of the National Patrick Henry Caucus, and Josh Ebach, he's a policy analyst with the 10th Amendment Center. Representative Wimmer, to you first. Tell us what happened. What property do the feds own, and what property does Utah want to take from them, and how does it propose to do this?
Well, thank you very much, Judge. It's an honor to be on here with you to talk about this. It was a little less than a year ago that we announced the formation of the Patrick Henry Caucus on this very show. This particular piece of legislation is the brainchild of one of the co-founders of the caucus, Representative Chris Herod from Provo. And what this does is essentially creates a funding source and compels our Attorney General to claim eminent domain over certain pieces and parcels of land that the federal government has come in and taken from Utah.
All right, so
Utah,
the feds took the money took the property, excuse me, a Freudian slip there. So the feds took the property from Utah, paid Utah for it against its will. Utah accepted the money, deeded the property to the feds. Now Utah wants to reverse that project. What does Utah want to do with the property? Why do they lay claim to this real estate?
Well, at statehood, Utah was granted several parcels of land that was supposed to go to our school trusts. That money was supposed to be developed and or sold, and the money was supposed to go to help our children's education. Utah is the lowest funded per pupil in the nation because we have a lot of children.
Right.
What we want to do with it is we want to be able to develop these lands or sell these lands and have that money go towards our education system as it was intended at statehood. But the federal government has come in and locked up access. We can't even access a tremendous amount of the land that we were granted at statehood.
Think about that. They can't even
Almost
access
70% of Utah
What is there,
owned by
like
the
a
federal
wall?
government.
Mr. Ebach, how unusual is this that a state would lay claim to federal
So
property? I must
that's
tell you,
kind of the essence of that. The idea, and in 2012 they went ahead and passed to try to get some of this land back. A lot of this is tied up and brought to the forefront with the Bundys, but there's so much more. There's a lot of angry ranchers, and
you would be too.
in most of the Northeast and the South, where the only federal presence is the occasional military base or the national park, complaints that the government owns too much land is laughable. But out west, the government lays claim to huge state-sized swaths of land, more than 630 million acres, greater than the land masses of Texas, California, Florida, and New York combined. I think I told you some of them own like 80%, like in Nevada. And you can see this behind me, maybe in the blue versus the red. I really like the red. The ranchers have bemoaned the government's hold on Western land, which at least is out for grazing through the Bureau of Land Management. And then,
So to back up, for those of you that don't know, because this is something, if we live in the East Coast, we don't really hear about this or even know what this land is, such that if you've ever seen an old Western where there was kind of fights over grazing, these ranchers don't actually own a lot of the land that their cattle is grazing on, but they're allowed to graze their cattle on this land.
it's empty. It's like when you look at it, you'll find that like most of this land is like far from even the most rural people.
Right.
It's so empty.
Almost like if you were grazing your cattle out there, no one is ever going to even know it's that far away.
Right. And the complaint of the ranchers is like, seriously, you can't own it all.
Right.
You can't own it all. I mean, and they can't.
And let's say a rancher has their land, where their house is or whatever, and they want to buy or purchase the surrounding lands, and then the government will not sell it. That goes back to what we read earlier. There's no reason for the federal government to hang on to this land. The federal government doesn't need it for any reason.
So here's Keith Nance. He didn't agree with the way the Bundys did things, but he understood where their position is. He grew up ranching in East Oregon. He knew he always wanted to be a rancher. He wanted to bring wholesome beef for our growing population. Now I'm going to get to something in a minute. You're going to understand why it's important that we have ranchers, why we have farmers. It's kind of like saying to Ohio, you shouldn't. I mean, where are you going to get your food from? I mean, seriously, and this is why, and I don't want to spoil my little thing, but this is why we're bringing in and importing beef from Australia,
Don't say that.
Canada, and Mexico, because the United States is making it so difficult for a rancher in America to make a profit.
Right.
And we're all about local cattlemen.
Local source food.
So if you want to know why we have to feed so much, confined animals, because the government isn't letting people use it for what it should be used for. And if you look at Joel Salatin, you'll find that a lot of these ranchers, they might overgraze, but a lot of them have learned and they're trying to be good stewards of the land. This particular rancher works 15-hour days. He works as a vet, a mechanic, and agronomist and an accountant. He loves the work, but it's grueling. And there's raising cattle requires a lot of land, much more than most ranchers can afford outright.
Exactly.
He says he leases about a third space from private owners, but not everybody's so lucky. The federal government controls huge amounts of land. We just keep hitting that. About 50% in some states,
It's
like
crazy.
Oregon. And ranchers must lease that space to create a sustainable operation. Utilizing federal land requires ranchers to follow an unfair, complicated and constantly evolving set of rules. If you have a set of rules, you
Right.
stick with it, you're
Right.
good. But you've got the federal government agency, for example, might decide they want to limit the number of days a rancher can graze their cattle to protect a certain
Oh my
endangered
gosh.
species or
I would
plant. Like
lose
with
my
the
mind.
Bundys, it was the desert tortoise.
Stop it.
The
I am
desert-
all about tortoises. They're great. Okay?
But it wasn't for real. It's a fake claim. It's not really for the desert tortoise.
Right.
Okay.
Somebody had an agenda
Right.
and they decided to push it, and the Bundys pushed back.
Or the government might unilaterally decide that ranchers can't use as much water as they need because of a fight over water rights. Or they might take over land that once belonged to state or private individuals, imposing an entirely new set of restrictions.
Right.
This guy's seen this play out firsthand with the list when the federal government listed the sage grouse, a chicken-like bird, is endangered. That regulation would have shrunk the amount of land where ranchers could graze cattle, putting out many out of business and decimating the industry, your whole livelihood. To avoid this, ranchers like himself and local officials spent months meeting with the federal officials looking for a compromise. They actually found a middle ground, but they spent days and hours. When
lost.
the people who don't understand the way agriculture works and things like that just make these, well,
They come in and they just come with these sweeping
Right.
regulations, and it's like, wait, that will not work. And
So-
then they want to argue with the people that know.
and the thing of it is these agencies that control these lands can add burdensome regulations at any time, and they'll aggressively enforce them before the ranchers have a time to even adjust to what's
So I want to
going
bring
on.
this back to a personal level, because I know that a lot of you guys don't really know very much about Leah and I, but when our grandmother passed away, it was her intention that the house that we now own be given to us because we take care of our uncle. Now, we had a major battle with our one uncle and our two aunts over this during over a 2-year period. And Leah and I ended up buying the house outright anyway, but they came up with this wonderful idea where the house would be put in our name underneath this like clause where one of the stipulations was like we had to live here for like what 7 or 15 years. I don't even remember. It's been so long, 15 years or whatever. And that
within those 15 years they could have some,
at any moment within those 15 years, if they felt like we were not upkeeping the house to their standards, then they could come and take it back. And within that, then they would quote unquote give us the house. But we had to both live here for 15 years, or else it would, it was like the whole thing was completely ridiculous. But that's what this reminds me of. Because we thought to ourselves, okay, so at any moment they could come and say, look, there's a shingle that's popped up. We're going to take the house back. And that's what the federal government does. And when people have a power trip and they don't want to let go of power, that's
Right.
what they do. They put it within the little fine print that at any moment they can come in and do something. So it looks like they're doing this great thing. and
So
then-
you wanted to know, the Obama administration has been extremely harsh against
No.
with regulating and enforcing. When we think environmental restrictions, it doesn't always mean that it's helping the environment. Okay,
most of the time it's actually bad.
so
For the environment.
this article was written right before Obama did this, but he did do this. He turned 2 million acres of federal land into a national monument, which would move to severely restrict grazing.
Right.
And so that was another movie. A lot of different things. People were a little upset about that. A lot of people think it's great. It's going to be a national monument. $2 million of a national monument. This isn't like
2 million
walking.
acres, you mean?
2 million acres. This isn't like walking up to see, the
Washington Monument.
the presidents on
or the Lincoln Memorial.
What's the presidents in the
Mount
rock?
Rushmore.
Yep, Mount Rushmore.
That one.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
so-
like that. We're talking, it was actually 2.5 million.
So in
acres.
talking about producing a safe form of meat, I would like to bring up this. This is a really good one. Let's see. Here we go. Sorry, guys. Trying to find it here. La, 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 la.
You're getting a preview
There
for
we
what's
go.
coming.
All right. So this is a girl on the Blaze. I've seen a couple of videos, but her name is Tommy Lauren.
Resurgence. It's about a hardworking God on both the left and for final thoughts.
Okay,
Now,
sorry.
contrary to popular belief on both the left and right, 2017 is not about a
It's loud so they
conservative
can catch up on the
resurgence.
camera. I
It's
know.
about a hardworking, God-fearing, nation-loving, take-no-crap American people resurgence. Now, the American worker has been drop-kicked by both political parties, but not just those steel, coal, and factory workers. The American farmer and cattlemen have also been kicked in the teeth, hard. And today I'm going to use my voice and my platform and your attention to help change that. Now imagine your entire livelihood dictated by the bank, the weather, and luck. Yeah, the American cowboy and cattlemen have never had it easy, but these last 2 years have been brutal. The cost to operate has gone up while the price of cattle has gone down a lot. Most ranchers are struggling to feed their cattle and stay operational. It's a daily freaking battle, but one you'll hardly hear them complain about. The American cattleman is a proud breed, and not one to ask for much. They just pray for a fair shake, and that's what I need your help with. Now, a little over a year ago, Congress repealed the COOL law. That's country of origin labeling on your meat products. Foreign beef producers and the big meat packers were complaining, and our legislators folded. This means the meat you're buying no longer has a country of origin label. Where is your meat coming from? Do you know? Well, I'll tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from Argentina, Canada, Brazil, Australia, and Japan. It's not coming from the American rancher like it used to.
Boo!
That means your beef is transported in crates for
Think
God
about
only
that.
knows how long.
It makes me
And
want to
look,
hurl.
That means live cattle are smashed into shipping containers and shipped to this country to be
Come
slaughtered for a
on.
discount rate, all to enrich the
Oh, somebody hit the button.
It's loading
Oops. Well, we can take a stop.
until she starts screaming at us again.
I'll have to cut it. Maybe I need to redo it. I don't know what's going on. There's a lot of editing I'm going to do with this video. That's so fun.
You want to play it again?
No, I'm going to bring it at the...
Oh, because
are smashed into shipping containers and shipped to this country to be slaughtered for a discount rate, all to enrich the top dog meat packers, all at the expense of the American rancher. Would you have your family eat out of a dumpster, not knowing what's on your table?
ew.
Well, then why the hell would you put foreign sketchy beef on your table? See, I don't just believe, I know the United States produces the best food, the best beef in the world, and every American has the right to know where their food is coming from.
Right.
If you still want to eat that foreign-raised crap, go for it, but you should know what you're getting. It's as simple as that.
Right.
The American rancher has been squeezed, poked, and prodded by the greedy meatpacking industry. They control the market, they control the price. They buy this cheap foreign beef, and your American ranchers are going under. Not because they can't compete in quality, because they can't compete with the mystery meat brought over here from God knows where. Now, I know most of you aren't cattlemen, you're not ranchers, you're not farmers, you don't raise livestock, but you do eat it, and you deserve America's best. If your heartland neighbors can raise enough beef to feed the United States and much of the world, why would
not?
you import it?
Why?
So next time you sit down for a steak, a burger, or a pot roast, remember the American cattleman and ask your grocer, your butcher, your market where their beef is from. It's time to make the American table American again. Those are my final thoughts. Follow me on.
So I really like what you had to say there. I don't agree. We're not conservatives. We are where we are. We don't.
We
say
said in
left,
our
we
last, yeah, we don't lean to the left, we don't lean to the right, we lean on the Word of God.
Amen. Exactly. So, I'm going to bring up my little map again. But, so kind of to round this all off, constitutionally, the federal government needs to dispose of much of this land.
Yeah.
And I know I hear the fight back. I can hear you out there. What's going to happen? It's all going to turn into mush. You mean like what we've done in the eastern half of America?
Yeah.
You know,
Everybody in the East Coast of America, we feel like we own the country. And what we want is this ideal where we can live in these cities with these high-risers where there are no trees anywhere, or live in our little subdivisions
You want to go
where
to
there are no
subdivision where
trees.
they plow everything up.
Exactly. And then you plant a couple little trees around your yard.
You're
You
not a
have no shade.
conservationist. Your house isn't conserving
But you
anything.
want to
You're
be
not
able
an environmentalist.
You want to be able to travel to these states that you don't live in, okay? And you want your conservation there because we still want to be able to look at the beauty, but we don't want to live in it.
Right. Exactly. You want to buy a house in a subdivision that totally decimates the environment.
Yes.
Takes away every tree,
Right.
puts a house and then a house and then a house and then a house without any thought of positioning for the weather or the
Exactly.
sun, the southern sun, and to bring you warmth. You want to have your cookie cutter house. You want to go to the grocery store. You don't want to think about where your food comes from.
Right.
You don't want to know how it's produced.
Yeah.
You have this ideal of, federal land, they can own 53% out there and not allow some cattle to poop on it, which actually produces
Better soil.
you need to have that constant
renewal.
think about the buffalo the buffalo were numbered in like the billions, and they covered the whole United States, and especially the western part of the United States, and they were pooping up a storm, man. It's called mob grazing, and something
it
that
was
is needed.
Fine. When Lewis and Clark did their exploration of this great western expanse, it was beautiful.
So cattle can actually
and there was
be
cattle everywhere.
buffalo.
Well,
Yeah.
buffalo are like cattle. They're
Right.
the exact same
So
thing.
it can definitely be a good thing. I'm not saying that all the land should be for grazing purposes. I think that there's a talk that needs to be had. I think this is something that we need to talk about. So leave your comments. Let's talk about these things. Let's begin to open up a dialogue, and let's begin to take. All I know for sure is that the federal government is too federal, and there's too much government. And if we put it back in the hands of the states and then back into the individuals, we just need to have our own lives back.
Right. And so when you look at, we have a lot of friends that are Obama supporters. And when you're a supporter of someone, and we all do this, we're all guilty of it, whenever they do something, we just want to agree with it so bad. We can't objectively look at it and say, that was wrong, that's going to be bad.
Right.
All right? So if Leah, who I respect highly more than anybody else that I know, were to have made this exact same decision as Obama, I would have said, you're an idiot. I would have said it nicer because she's my sister. To Obama, I would say you're an idiot. But what you're doing is taking away the state's rights to control their land. You're taking away jobs are such a big deal, right? Big in creating jobs. And yet they have no problem going in when we have our American ranchers and farmers that are doing something on this land that is rightfully theirs to do on, and we're making it impossible for them to do the things they need to do. Why? Because we want to push people out of land and into the cities where we can give them jobs. We want to put America
And just
back to
bring
slavery
in
again.
Food from foreign
Right.
countries,
Right.
and basically it's like slavery all over.
It
again,
is
but you
slavery
don't
all over
see it
again.
If it's in some other.
We want to cry our trail of tears over the trail of tears, but it's happening right now with our American ranchers and farmers.
Right.
We're taking their land away from them, and nobody cares because they're not Cherokee, or they're not Pawnee, or they're not, whatever. It's like, or they're not black, or they're not Hispanic, or they're not, because most of these people are white. And so we look at it and we're like, well, it's okay to do whatever we want to the white man because they're oppressive and they oppressed us. It's like, no, it's time to stand up for everybody that's being oppressed. Sorry. The end.
All right, so we're gonna end our segment there on federal lands, and we're moving on. Okay,
Sorry.
so if you have just joined us, we are now going to move on to what I'm kind of pretty excited about. Representatives Thomas Massey,
We love him.
we love him, and Rand Paul have both reintroduced bills to audit the Fed.
I was cold all alone. No place for